On the outer edges of Coalition space, stars that once shone over peaceful colonies now lit the wreckage of broken fleets. The Verkal swarm moved like a tide of steel and hunger. They did not negotiate. They did not build. They only consumed. Whole planets were stripped bare within days, their defenders either destroyed or taken to feed the swarm's endless advance. For centuries, the Galactic Coalition had believed their fleets were enough. Their starships were sleek and advanced, powered by energy cores that could move faster than light. Their defense grids had stood against pirates, raiders, and even civil wars. But the Verkal were different. They were not simply another enemy. They were a storm. Admiral Traval, commander of the defense of the Duran sector, stood inside the wide, glowing war room of the Coalition flagship. Around him, holographic stars blinked in shifting patterns, red markers spreading like blood across the map. The swarm was advancing faster than reports could be confirmed. Worlds were falling in days, sometimes in hours. "We cannot hold them," one of his officers whispered, her crest flattened against her head, a sign of fear in her species. "Every world we send fleets to defend becomes a graveyard." Traval's heavy jaw tightened. He was old enough to remember the Coalition's great victories, but never had he seen their fleets broken so quickly. Their enemies fought with predictable tactics, lines of battle, formations of ships. The Verkal had no such limits. They swarmed in numbers too great to count, their ships moving like predators in a frenzy. Still, he had to try. "Send the call again," Traval said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber. "Every channel. Every allied world. Whoever can hear us, we need reinforcements." The signal had already been sent many times, but he gave the order again. Across subspace, the message spread. "The Coalition is under attack. The Verkal swarm is advancing. Any who can fight, come to Darren Prime. It may be our last stand." Most replies came back with silence. Some allies admitted their fleets were already destroyed. Others sent apologies, claiming they could not risk their own worlds. Traval listened to each message with growing despair, and then one answer arrived. The transmission was faint, distorted by distance. It came from a small blue-green planet on the edge of mapped space. A world most Coalition species barely noticed, considered too wild, too unstable. The planet's people were newcomers to the galactic stage. They called themselves humans. The message was simple. "This is Earth Fleet Command. We have received your call. Reinforcements are on the way." Traval blinked in disbelief. Humans. Of all the possible allies, it had to be them. He turned to his advisors. "The Deathworlders are answering." A murmur of unease filled the war room. To most civilized species, humans were little more than a curiosity. Their home planet Earth was infamous in scientific records, a world too dangerous for life. Its gravity was stronger than most species could endure. Its weather was violent, full of storms and shifting climates. Its lands and seas teemed with predators, diseases, and natural disasters. Most aliens considered it a wonder that such a place had produced intelligent life at all. Humans had only joined the galactic community a few decades ago, and they were strange. They laughed too loudly. They argued constantly. They seemed to throw themselves into danger with no sense of self-preservation. And yet they survived. Somehow they always survived. "Humans cannot stand against the Verkal," one general said sharply. His scales glittered as he shook his head. "They are too few, too primitive. Their fleets are untested," another added. "Their technology is not on our level. Their warships are small, their shields weak. If they come, they will only die." Traval listened but said nothing. In his heart, he agreed. What could one small world do against the swarm? But still, they had answered when so many others had turned away. For the next days, the fleet of Duran Prime prepared for the enemy. The Verkal would be here soon. Refugees flooded the planet below, civilians from fallen colonies. In the skies above, thousands of alien warships formed their last defense, and every officer watched the star charts, wondering if the humans would truly come, or if their message was only empty bravado. The answer came sooner than expected. On the morning of the 5th day, alarms rang through the fleet. A group of ships was approaching, not Verkal but allies. Coalition officers rushed to their stations. On the display, a ragged formation of vessels blinked into real space. Human ships. Traval leaned forward, studying the sight. They were not sleek and graceful like Coalition cruisers. Their shapes were harsh, angular, built for function rather than beauty. Some were painted in dull grays. Others carried strange markings, numbers, letters, even symbols of animals or flags. Compared to the elegant designs of most species, they looked almost primitive. But there was something in their movements. The way they turned, the way they formed into tight groups, it was sharp, efficient, and oddly aggressive. A transmission opened. The face of a human officer filled the screen. His uniform was simple, his expression calm but firm. "This is Admiral Hayes of Earth Fleet Command," he said. "We've brought reinforcements." Treval studied him carefully. The human's eyes were steady, unwavering like a predator who had already chosen his next move. You came," Treval said at last. "Of course," Hayes replied. "You called for help. That's what allies do." Behind Treval, the other generals whispered in disbelief. Reinforcements, yes, but too few. The human fleet numbered less than 100 ships. The Verkal would bring thousands. "This is not enough," one officer muttered. "They will be crushed." But Treval kept his eyes on the human. "Admiral Hayes, you understand the enemy we face? The Verkal swarm has destroyed fleets far greater than yours." Hayes nodded. "We've read the reports." "Doesn't matter." "Doesn't matter?" Another general snapped. The human smiled faintly. "We didn't come here to run." Treval felt something stir in his chest. He had seen many species in war, but there was something strange about these humans. Something dangerous, perhaps, but also something he could not name. The Verkal were coming. Soon the skies above DEATHWORLD would burn, and when they did, the humans would be there. The swarm came sooner than expected. Only 2 days after the humans arrived, the outer listening posts screamed warnings across every channel. Thousands of Verkal ships burst from hyperspace at the edge of the system, moving with their usual terrifying speed. They were not sleek like Coalition cruisers. Their ships looked more like living things, spiked, jagged, swarming in chaotic packs. They did not form lines of battle. They rushed forward like predators smelling blood. In the command chamber above DEATHWORLD, Admiral Treval stood at the center of the glowing war table. Red markers flooded across the display, representing the swarm. The sheer number of them made the chamber fall silent. Some officers whispered prayers in their own languages. Others simply stared, frozen with dread. "They are too many," one commander muttered. "We cannot hold." Treval's eyes hardened. He was about to give the order to retreat to the inner defense line when another fleet icon appeared on the screen. Small compared to the swarm, but moving with sharp precision. The humans. The voice of Admiral Hayes came calmly over the channel. "Coalition Command, this is Earth Fleet. Do not fall back." "Hold your line. We'll take point." The chamber erupted in confusion. "What are they saying?" one general demanded. "They cannot face the swarm alone." Treval himself was struck silent. The humans had fewer than 100 ships. The Verkal had thousands. It was not a battle. It was suicide. "Transmit to the humans," Treval ordered. His voice was tight. "Tell them to fall back into formation. If they throw themselves forward, they will die in minutes." But the humans did not answer his warning. Their ships were already moving, pushing ahead of the Coalition fleet. Treval clenched his jaw. He had no choice but to watch. Out in the darkness of space, the human fleet surged forward. Their ships were not beautiful. Their armor was rough, their hulls scarred from old battles. Some ships looked like they had been repaired too many times, their plates uneven and mismatched. But their engines burned bright, and their formation closed tight as they rushed toward the swarm. On the bridge of the human flagship Resolute, Admiral Hayes stood with his hands clasped behind his back. Around him, his crew worked with calm focus. No one panicked. No one hesitated. They had seen worse. Earth itself had been worse. Range to target, Hayes asked. 60,000 kilometers and closing fast, his tactical officer replied. "Good. Begin fire pattern Delta. Keep it messy. Make them chase us." "Yes, Admiral." The human ships lit the void with weapons fire. Railguns spat metal slugs at incredible speed. Missiles streaked out in long, bright trails. Compared to the precise energy beams of the Coalition, the human weapons looked crude. But when they struck, the results were undeniable. Verkal ships burst apart in flashes of fire and debris. The swarm reacted instantly, hundreds of ships breaking formation to chase the humans. Hayes gave the order and his fleet scattered, not in panic but in deliberate chaos. They weaved between asteroids, darted through debris fields, and even skimmed dangerously close to DEATHWORLD's defense grid. Coalition officers watching the battle gasped. No disciplined fleet would ever fight like this. It was madness, pure madness. But somehow it worked. The Verkal pursued aggressively, but their numbers became tangled. Some crashed into asteroids. Others collided with their own kind in the frenzy. Human missiles detonated among the confusion, shattering groups of enemies at once. Impossible, one alien general whispered in the command chamber. They are outmaneuvering the swarm? Treval said nothing. He could not look away. On the ground below, refugees huddled in shelters watching the battle unfold on massive screens. They had expected to see the skies fall in fire. Instead, they saw the impossible, the swarm slowing, hesitating, even breaking apart under the humans' wild assault. For the first time, hope spread among the civilians. The Deathworlders were fighting for them. Back on the Resolute, Hayes studied the tactical display. Enemy losses were mounting, but the swarm was still enormous. This was only the beginning. Signal the boarding crews, he ordered. At once, several human ships fired grappling charges into disabled Verkal vessels. Where other species preferred to destroy enemy ships from a distance, humans did something unthinkable. They boarded them. Hundreds of human marines, armored in heavy suits, stormed into alien corridors. They fought not with elegant plasma rifles, but with brutal, simple weapons. Kinetic firearms, explosives, and blades. Coalition observers watching the feeds were horrified. Close combat was madness. The Verkal were monstrous, larger and stronger than most humanoids. But the humans fought like predators, fast and merciless, using every trick their harsh world had taught them. One Marine commander laughed as he reported in over the comms. Enemy ship secured, sending them a little gift now. Moments later, the captured Verkal vessel detonated from the inside, taking a cluster of swarm ships with it. In the Coalition command chamber, silence fell again. The alien general stared in disbelief at the screens. They fight inside the enemy? One asked in shock. They fight like they are born for this, another whispered. Treval felt a shiver run down his spine. Perhaps like they were, the battle raged on. Hours passed. The Coalition fleet, inspired by the humans, pushed forward and rejoined the fight. The humans had bought them time. They had broken the swarm's momentum, and together they turned the tide. By the end of the day, the battlefield was littered with burning wrecks. Hundreds of Verkal ships had been destroyed. The survivors retreated into the void, something that had never been seen before. The swarm had always pressed forward, relentless. But now, for the first time, they pulled back. Inside the command chamber, the Coalition officers stared at the displays with wide eyes. They could hardly believe it. The impossible had happened. They are retreating, someone whispered. Treval let out a long breath he had not realized he was holding. He turned to the human admiral's transmission, which still hovered in the air. Admiral Hayes stood calmly, his uniform slightly rumpled, as if the battle had been nothing more than a long day's work. Admiral Treval, Hayes said, your line held. Well fought, Treval swallowed hard. No, it was you. Without your fleet, DEATHWORLD would be ash. Hayes shook his head. We're not miracle workers. The swarm will be back, stronger, but now you know they can bleed. The Coalition chamber fell silent again. Those words struck deep. Yes, the Verkal could bleed. The invincible swarm was not invincible after all. Treval bowed his head slightly. The Coalition owes you a debt, Admiral Hayes. Your people fought when all others fled. The human gave a small smile. That's what we do. And with that, the transmission ended. Treval looked around the chamber at his officers. For weeks they had lived in fear, but now he saw something different in their eyes. Not despair. Not even simple relief, hope. Above DEATHWORLD, fragments of broken ships drifted in silence, spinning slowly in the darkness. Some pieces were as small as dust. Others were the size of cities. Fires burned in the vacuum, fueled by leaking reactors. Whole clouds of twisted metal spread like scars across the sky. For hours after the battle, the survivors worked to secure the system. Coalition ships searched for life pods. Rescue teams hauled injured soldiers from the ruins. Medical ships rushed to patch wounds and save as many as possible. But no one forgot what they had seen. The swarm had been pushed back. That fact alone spread through the fleet like wildfire. For years, the Verkal had been unstoppable. Now for the first time they had bled. And it was the humans who had drawn that blood. Inside the command chamber, Admiral Treval stood with his officers reviewing the reports. His scales shimmered faintly under the glow of the hollow table. "Losses are heavy," one officer said. "We have lost 1/3 of our fleet." "Entire squadrons are gone," Treval nodded grimly. He had expected worse. Against the swarm, survival itself was victory. "And the humans?" he asked. The officer hesitated. "Their fleet remains largely intact. They took damage, yes, but far less than expected. Their ships are scarred, but many remain combat-ready." Treval narrowed his eyes. That was impossible. The humans had thrown themselves straight into the jaws of the swarm. By all logic, they should have been annihilated. And yet their losses were far fewer than his own disciplined forces. "Show me their combat footage again," Treval ordered. The hollow table shifted, replaying recordings from the battle. Human ships darted between asteroids, fired unpredictable salvos, and even collided deliberately with enemy vessels when no other option remained. Their marines stormed into enemy ships with reckless fury, using crude weapons that still managed to kill Verkal warriors. Coalition officers watched with a mix of awe and horror. "They are reckless," one muttered. "This is not war. This is madness." "And yet it works," another said quietly. Treval stayed silent. His gaze lingered on the human ships moving in sharp, aggressive formations. Their strategies broke every rule of warfare the Coalition had followed for centuries. But perhaps that was why they survived. In orbit nearby on the human flagship Resolute, Admiral Hayes stood among his own officers. The atmosphere was calmer here. The crew moved with steady confidence, as if nothing unusual had happened. Reports flowed across the bridge. Boarding teams recovered. Enemy ships destroyed. Minimal casualties compared to projections. Hayes nodded, satisfied. His people had done what they came to do. But he knew the battle was only the beginning. "Signal Earth," he said quietly. "Tell command we've engaged the swarm and forced them to retreat." One officer raised a brow. "Sir, do you think they'll believe it?" Hayes gave a faint smile. "They'll believe the swarm is not invincible. That's all that matters." Back on DEATHWORLD, news spread across the civilian shelters. Refugees gathered around public screens, watching replays of the battle. They gasped at the sight of human ships charging into impossible odds. They cheered when swarm vessels exploded in clouds of fire. To those who had only known fear, the humans became legends overnight. "They came for us," one alien whispered, clutching her child, when no one else did. "The Deathworlders," another muttered. "They fight like monsters, but they fight for us." For the first time in years, hope grew among the people, but not all were pleased. In a quiet chamber deep within the Coalition flagship, several generals gathered in secret. They spoke in low tones, their voices sharp with unease. "These humans are dangerous," one said. "Did you see how they fight? They risk everything. They have no discipline. They will cause chaos," another agreed. "If we follow their ways, we will lose ourselves." "They are not allies," a third hissed. "They are predators. And predators cannot be trusted." The chamber fell silent when Admiral Treval entered. His eyes swept across them with cold authority. "You speak as though they are the enemy," he said. "They are a danger," one general insisted. "What happens when their hunger for war grows? What happens when they turn on us?" Treval's gaze hardened. "Without them, we would already be dead. The swarm would have consumed us all. Remember that." The generals fell silent, though their unease did not vanish. Treval left them with heavy thoughts. Perhaps they were right to be cautious, but he could not deny the truth. Humanity had given the galaxy its first victory, far beyond DEATHWORLD. In the dark reaches of space, the Verkal swarm gathered. In a massive hive ship, larger than a moon, the Swarm Lord sat upon his throne of living metal. His eyes glowed with cold fire as he studied the reports from the battle. The swarm had been forced to retreat. For the first time in countless campaigns, they had been driven back. The Swarm Lord hissed in anger, his claws scraping the throne. His generals bowed low before him, their voices trembling. The prey fought harder than expected. "They used strange tactics. They surprised us." The Swarm Lord's voice rumbled like thunder. "Not the prey, the new ones. The Deathworlders." The generals hissed in confusion. The Swarm Lord raised a clawed hand. "Mark them. Study them. They are not like the others. They are dangerous." A ripple of unease spread through the chamber. The Verkal had faced countless species before. None had ever made them retreat. None had ever drawn blood like this, but now, humanity had, and the swarm would not forget. Back on the Resolute, Admiral Hayes sat in his quarters reviewing reports. His eyes lingered on the numbers, losses far lighter than expected, but still too many lives gone. He closed the file and leaned back in his chair. A soft knock came at the door. His first officer entered holding a datapad. "Sir, message from the Coalition. They are asking for a joint strategy meeting tomorrow. They want us to share our tactics." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "Do they?" "Yes, sir, but—" The officer hesitated. "Sir, some of them do not trust us. We can feel it. They whisper that we are too dangerous, too reckless." Hayes gave a dry laugh. "They're not wrong. We are dangerous. That's why we're still alive." The officer nodded. "What should I tell them?" "Tell them we'll attend," Hayes said after a moment. "If they want to learn, we'll teach them. But make it clear, we don't fight their way. We fight ours." The next day, in the grand chamber of the Coalition capital ship, leaders from dozens of species gathered. They filled the room with nervous voices, discussing strategies and fears. At the center stood Admiral Hayes, calm and steady. He did not speak in complex terms. He did not use elegant words. He simply explained, "We fight the way we do because we had no choice. Our world tried to kill us long before the swarm ever did. Every storm, every predator, every disease, we learned to adapt or we died. That is our history. That is why we are here." The chamber fell silent. One alien general raised a trembling hand. And if we follow your ways? If we fight as you fight?" Hayes looked around the chamber, his eyes sharp. "Then you might just survive." That night, Travail walked through the quiet halls of his ship, thinking of the words he had heard. He still feared the humans. Their ways were harsh, brutal, unlike anything the Coalition had ever known. But he also knew this: the galaxy had changed. The swarm was no longer untouchable, because the Deathworlders had arrived and nothing would ever be the same. The War Council chamber was full. Admirals, generals, and commanders from across the Coalition sat around the glowing war table. Their voices filled the air in 100 languages, each translated into the common tongue. Some argued. Some pleaded. Many simply looked tired. At the far end of the chamber stood Admiral Travail. He had called the meeting to order, but the voices around him refused to settle. The recent victory at DEATHWORLD had shaken them all. They could not decide if it was a miracle, a trick, or something far stranger. Finally, Travail raised his clawed hand for silence. His voice cut through the noise like a blade. "Enough. We are here to discuss one question. How did the humans succeed where we failed?" The room went quiet. Dozens of eyes turned toward the human delegation standing on the opposite side of the table. Admiral Hayes and a few of his officers stood calmly waiting. Their uniforms were simple, their faces unreadable. One alien general finally spoke. His crest twitched nervously as he addressed the humans. "Your fleet should have been destroyed. The swarm outnumbered you 100 to 1, yet you survived. You even forced them to retreat. How?" Hayes folded his arms. His tone was calm but direct. "Because we don't fight like you." Murmurs spread through the chamber. "What does that mean?" Another commander demanded. Hayes looked around the room. His eyes were steady, sharp like a predator's gaze. "It means we don't play by the same rules. We don't fight wars like a game of strategy, moving pieces on a board. For us, war has always been survival, and survival means doing whatever it takes." One admiral frowned. "You risked everything. You boarded enemy ships, you rammed vessels, you fought with weapons centuries behind our technology. That is not strategy. That is madness." Hayes gave a faint smile. "Maybe. But madness works when you live on a death world." The room fell silent. Travail leaned forward slowly. "Explain." And so the humans told their story. They spoke of Earth, of storms that could swallow cities, of oceans that raged with waves taller than towers, of forests filled with predators that hunted even in the dark. They spoke of diseases that killed by the millions, of deserts that burned, of mountains that froze, of earthquakes that tore the land apart without warning. Where most species had evolved on gentle worlds, safe and balanced, humans had grown on a planet that seemed determined to destroy them. "We had no choice but to adapt," one human officer said. "On Earth, if you weren't smart, you died. If you weren't fast, you died. If you weren't willing to fight, you died. Our world made us what we are." The aliens listened in stunned silence. Another human continued. "When you live every day knowing the world itself is trying to kill you, You learn a simple rule: survive at any cost. That is our logic. Deathworld logic. The words hung heavy in the chamber. One alien admiral shook his head in disbelief. But you risk your lives so easily. You throw yourselves into danger without fear. A human marine standing at Hayes's side chuckled softly. Fear? Of course we feel fear. But fear is useless unless you move through it. On Earth, if you freeze, you die. So we learn to keep going no matter how scared we are. Another alien whispered. They treat fear as fuel. Trevor's scales rippled in thought. He had seen it himself during the battle. Where his own crews hesitated, humans pressed forward. Where other soldiers froze in terror of the swarm, humans charged. It had looked like recklessness, but now he began to understand. It was not recklessness, it was survival carried in their blood. Still not all were convinced. One general stood sharply, his voice edged with anger. You speak of survival, but you endanger us all. Your methods are too violent, too unpredictable. If the coalition adopts your ways, we will lose order. We will lose everything we stand for. Hayes met his gaze calmly. Then keep fighting your way. Keep losing. See how long you survive. The chamber stirred with uneasy murmurs. Some were offended. Others were quietly agreeing. Travail raised his hand again. Enough, the humans' methods are strange, yes. But we cannot deny their results. We must decide. Will we learn from them or will we continue as before? That night after the council, Travail walked the quiet halls of his flagship. He found Admiral Hayes standing alone near a wide viewport staring out at the stars. You shook them, Travail said. Hayes did not look away from the stars. Good, they need shaking. The swarm won't stop because we're afraid to change. Travail stood beside him. For a long moment neither spoke. The stars stretched endlessly before them. Finally, Travail said softly, Your people frighten them. Even me, you fight with such abandon. It feels like watching fire, beautiful but dangerous. Hayes gave a small laugh. We are dangerous. That's the point. Travail studied him carefully. And when the swarm is gone? What will humanity do then? Hayes finally turned to meet his gaze. His eyes were steady, cold, but also carrying something deeper. We'll do what we always do, survive. Travail said nothing. But in his heart, he felt both unease and respect. These humans were unlike any species he had ever known. Meanwhile, word of humanity's deeds spread across the galaxy. On distant worlds, alien civilians whispered stories of the Deathworlders who had faced the swarm and lived. Some saw them as saviors, others saw them as monsters, but no one ignored them. And in the dark reaches of space, the Verkal swarm listened too. The Swarm Lord stood within his hive ship, his many eyes glowing as he studied stolen recordings of the humans' battle. He saw their ships darting through the void like hunters. He saw their soldiers storming into his vessels without hesitation. He saw their reckless, terrifying courage, the Swarm Lord hissed. For the first time, he felt something alien to his kind. Not fear, but curiosity. These new prey, he growled to his generals. They are different. They are not prey at all. One general bowed low. Shall we consume them? The Swarm Lord's eyes narrowed. No, not yet. We will study them. We will test them. We will see if Deathworlders can truly stand against the swarm. Back on DEATHWORLD, the Coalition fleet prepared for the next assault. Repairs were rushed. Crews trained harder than ever. But everywhere eyes turned to the humans. Some aliens tried to copy their methods. Boarding drills, aggressive maneuvers, unpredictable attacks. But it was not easy. They hesitated where humans pressed forward. They feared what humans seemed to embrace. Hayes watched them struggle. He did not laugh. He did not mock. He simply said, You can learn, but understand this isn't a tactic. It's a mindset. You can't just pretend to fight like us. You have to become it. Travail overheard those words and understood. This was not just about weapons or strategies. It was about the heart of a species. And maybe, just maybe, humanity's heart was exactly what the galaxy needed. When the warning alarms sounded weeks later, no one was surprised. The swarm was returning, stronger, angrier. But this time the Coalition did not face them with only fear. This time, they had learned a little of Deathworld logic, and they had humans at their side. The second swarm was larger than the first. When the warning came, the skies above DEATHWORLD filled with alarms. Thousands of red signals appeared on the scanners. The Verkal had returned, and this time they brought nearly twice as many ships. The void trembled with their numbers, their jagged vessels stretching across the horizon like a wall of teeth. Inside the coalition war chamber, silence fell. Every officer knew what they were seeing. The swarm was angry. The swarm had come to erase their shame. Admiral Treval's eyes narrowed as he studied the display. His scales shifted with unease, but his voice stayed steady. They are here for revenge. Around him, his generals murmured. Some whispered of retreat. Others whispered of doom. But then a new signal appeared on the scanners. Dozens of human ships, their engines burning bright as they surged into formation. The Resolute led the way, its scarred hull patched but strong. Admiral Hayes's voice cut through the static with calm authority. Coalition Fleet, this is Earth Fleet Command. Stand your ground. We fight here. We fight together. The humans had not come alone this time. More fleets had joined them. Reinforcements from Earth and its colonies, warships pulled from every system they could spare. The vessels still looked rough compared to the sleek coalition cruisers, but there were more of them now, and they carried the same fierce spirit as before. Treval felt something stir in his chest. Hope. He raised his voice across the command chamber. Signal the fleet. No retreat. We fight at Duran Prime. The battle began like a storm. The Verkal swarm surged forward, filling space with claws and fire. Their ships crashed against the coalition line, their numbers overwhelming. Shields flared, hulls cracked, and the void filled with explosions. But this time the coalition did not break. Human ships darted ahead, weaving through the enemy with reckless speed. Missiles streaked from their launchers. Railguns hammered through enemy armor. Boarding pods slammed into swarm vessels, spilling Marines into alien corridors. The coalition, inspired by their allies, followed suit. For the first time, alien soldiers boarded enemy ships as well. They were clumsy compared to humans, slower, less sure, but they tried. And slowly they learned. On the battlefield, chaos became strategy. The coalition line held, strengthened by Deathworld logic. Admiral Hayes stood at the bridge of the Resolute, watching the battle unfold. His officers called out reports. Enemy breaking through Sector 9. Coalition squadron requesting support. Boarding teams reporting heavy resistance. Hayes nodded. Send the 11th and 12th squadrons to Sector 9. Tell the Coalition squadron to hold just 30 seconds. We'll cover them. The orders flew and the humans moved like hunters. They didn't fight to look perfect. They fought to win. On the ground below, millions of refugees stared at the skies. Explosions lit the heavens, flashes of fire and shadow. They held their children close and prayed, and then they saw something new. Alien fleets fighting with courage, not just fear. Human ships charging side by side with them. Together, they were no longer just prey running from predators. They were fighting back. Hope spread through the shelters like fire. In the Coalition command chamber, Treval watched in awe as the battle raged. He had fought for decades, but never had he seen war like this. Humans used every trick, every risk, every mad idea, and somehow it worked. A general beside him gasped. They are cutting the swarm apart. Piece by piece, Treval's eyes shone. They are teaching us how to survive. But the swarm was not finished. Deep in the enemy ranks, the massive hive ship loomed. Larger than any vessel the Coalition had ever seen, it pulsed with a strange living glow. Its weapons unleashed torrents of fire, cutting through ships by the dozen. When it advanced, entire squadrons were crushed beneath its fury. In the command chamber, alarms screamed. It's too strong, one officer cried. We cannot destroy it. Treval turned to Hayes's transmission. Admiral, the hive ship. It will tear us apart. Hayes's voice came steady. Not if we take it down first, Treval froze. Take it down? It's the size of a moon. Hayes gave a grim smile. Big target. Hard to miss, the humans gathered their squadrons. Dozens of ships broke from the main line, charging straight toward the hive ship. The Coalition gasped in disbelief. They cannot, one general began. But Treval cut him off. They will. The attack was madness. The humans darted between the hive ship's endless guns, weaving through storms of fire. Whole ships were torn apart. Others rammed their enemies head-on. Boarding pods slammed into the hive ship's hull, vanishing into its dark interior. On the Resolute, Hayes gripped the railing as the ship shook under fire. Status of the boarding teams? He demanded. Inside, sir, came the reply. Fighting through heavy resistance, Hayes nodded. Tell them the target is the core. Bring that monster down. Inside the hive ship, human marines fought through twisting corridors of living metal. The air was thick with alien screams. The Verkal warriors towered over them, but the humans did not falter. They used explosives, blades, and sheer will to carve a path forward. One commander reported over comms, his voice strained but fierce. We've reached the core chamber. Setting charges now. Back on the Resolute, Hayes closed his eyes for a moment. He knew what that meant. Many would not return, but they were Deathworlders. They knew the cost. Minutes later, the core chamber erupted in light. On every scanner, the hive ship flared with sudden energy. For a moment, it seemed to hold, trembling with fury. Then, with a soundless scream across the void, it shattered. The explosion tore through the swarm, breaking their formations, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. On the ground below, the skies lit brighter than day. Refugees gasped and cried out as the massive hive ship broke apart. In the command chamber, silence fell. Then slowly, voices rose, cheers, shouts, hope. The hive ship is destroyed. The swarm is breaking. They are retreating. For the second time, the Verkal fled. Their countless ships scattered, broken, leaderless. The coalition had not only survived, they had won. Treval stood tall, his eyes wet with something he had not felt in years. Victory. He turned to Hayes' transmission. The human admiral stood calmly, his uniform torn, his face streaked with smoke but his eyes still sharp. You did it, Treval whispered. Hayes shook his head. We did it. Together. In the days that followed, word spread across the galaxy. The swarm had been defeated. Not destroyed, but beaten back. And the galaxy now knew who had done it. Every world spoke the same words. The humans came. The Deathworlders came. For the first time, the galaxy understood what that meant. It meant survival. At the final council meeting, Treval stood before the assembled leaders. His voice was steady as he addressed them. We called for help. Many ignored us. Many turned away. But when all seemed lost, one world answered, and that world was Earth. He looked toward the humans who stood quietly among them. They are not like us. Their ways are harsh. Their world is cruel. But because of that, they are strong. Strong enough to stand against the swarm. Strong enough to give us hope. He raised his voice so all could hear. When the swarm returns, and it will return, we will not be alone. Because when the Deathworlders arrive, survival is not a question. It is a promise. The chamber erupted in applause. On the Resolute, Admiral Hayes stood once more at the viewport watching the stars. His first officer joined him quietly. Sir, the Coalition sees us as heroes now. Hayes gave a faint smile. Heroes? No, just survivors. The officer hesitated. And the swarm? Do you think they'll come back stronger? Hayes' smile faded. His gaze stayed fixed on the stars. Of course they will. That's what predators do. But so do we. He straightened, his voice calm and firm. And when they come, we'll be ready. Because Earth always answers the call. The stars burned silently, endless and cold. But now the galaxy was no longer alone in the dark. The Deathworlders had arrived and they were here to stay.